Welcome, everybody. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture that produces this program, the Parent Education Series, now in its 16th year. We provide inclusive, high-quality parent and community education about topics that are important to you as parents and for students and educators, mental health professionals. We could not be more delighted to have with us tonight Eduardo Torres from Prevention Solutions to talk about substance use in the schools as our kids start back to in-person learning. So before I tell a little bit more about him, if you would like Spanish interpretation tonight, we have with us Cynthia Hinestrosa. So you can click on the globe and then that, I'll let you say it, Eduardo. If you could let people know that if you need Spanish, to click on the interpretation globe and then Spanish.
Ok, si necesitan servicios de traducción en español, abajo de la pantalla de Zoom aparece una cosa que dice EN o un globo, perdón. Cliquen en eso y les va a salir English y Spanish. Cliquen en Spanish y ahí la traducción va a ser simultánea en español.
Muchas gracias. This is perfect to have a bilingual presenter. In fact, Eduardo has joined us in previous events speaking Spanish. So tonight is the first time we're going to be talking in English. This is a wonderful opportunity. Again, tonight's program is called Supporting Your Child's Healthy Decisions in the Transition Back to School. And we really wanted to look at what is happening as kids head back to in-person school. So that's what the focus of tonight's event will be. We want to say a special thank you to TUPE, the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program of the San Mateo County Office of Education. Teresa Valles Kelly is the director of that program. The Sequoia Union High School District, Sequoia Healthcare District, Peninsula Healthcare District, and this organization, the Parent Venture. We are very grateful for your sponsorship of this program. Tonight, Eduardo will be speaking for about 45 minutes on the topic, and then we really want to engage you, the audience, and hear from you. So if you have comments or you'd like to reach us, the panelists, please put those comments in the chat. But for questions, we ask that you put those in the Q&A button. If you can, keep them general so that they can apply to as many people as possible. We promise to get to your questions in the last quarter of this presentation. Again, so about 45 minutes of the webinar workshop, followed by Q&A. Also, my partner, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links in the chat, so do check that out periodically. And at the very end of the program, she will put in a link for a very short survey. We hope you'll take 1 minute to fill that out. We promise we read them all, and it helps us with future planning for the Parent Education Series programming. The video is being recorded tonight so that you can share it with partners or students or anyone else who may be interested, and will be available soon on our video library, the YouTube channel, with now over 26,000 views. So let me tell you just a little bit about tonight's feature presenter. Eduardo Torres is a supervising field supervisor and senior prevention specialist at Prevention Solutions, formerly FCD Prevention Works, a leading international nonprofit provider of school substance abuse prevention services. Prevention Solutions, a program of Hazeldon Betty Ford Foundation, works around the world to provide students, parents, and families with the knowledge, understanding, and skills they need to make healthy decisions about the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Eduardo, thank you. Please take it away. Sorry about your title. You can clarify for folks.
Oh, it was perfect. Thanks so much, Charlene. And hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I really hope that when you leave this meeting within the next hour, that all of your questions, all of your doubts, everything that you had in mind was answered thoroughly. Thus, the need and the importance that if there are any questions, even as I'm talking, please, please, please feel free to put them at the Q&A, and I will be diligent about addressing every single question. I'm going to share my screen now, and here we go and start off. So we are essentially Prevention Solutions, part of the Hazeldon Betty Ford Foundation. We're a private nonprofit. We've been in the business for over 44 years. Traveling across 72 countries, and of course, delivering high quality prevention services to various communities around the world. I love this organization that I work for. What I love the most is that Even before I joined Prevention Solutions, I often thought that prevention was synonymous with prohibition, saying no. But it's really not. Prevention is hopefully instilling relevant health-based information so that folks can make healthier choices around life decisions. Most of the time, what a lot of people fail to recognize when it comes to substance use or substance misuse prevention is that information is critical so that young people can make healthier choices with their lives. You're looking at someone just like everyone else that works in prevention solutions that unfortunately was afflicted by the disease of addiction. And what I can tell you about this is that there were so many things that I lacked insofar as knowledge is concerned. That I didn't understand. And yet I made potentially life-altering choices without really understanding the repercussions of my decisions. So ever since I joined Prevention Solutions, it's been my life work to convey and transmit relevant health-based information so that hopefully when you leave here today, you can apply those universal health-based concepts to empower your son, daughter, they, them, to lead healthier lives than the ones I led. So that's really our aim and our focus here tonight is to hopefully transmit relevant health-based information related to substance use and substance misuse. So we'll go ahead and get started. So when I was thinking about doing this, what slides are the most relevant for parents, I couldn't help but think of the risk factors that significantly increase the likelihood of a person becoming chemically dependent and or addicted. So I'm going to mention the first one, which is family history. So we know now so much more about family history. There are three things that I want to mention when everyone talking about family history. So when people have a genetic predisposition to addiction, there are inherently three things that are different in them in comparison to someone that doesn't have a genetic predisposition to addiction. The first one is often referred to something called limbic hypersensitivity. So let me explain it like this. When people use any sort of mood altering substance or perform any sort of compulsory based behaviors, we know that the substance or the behavior is considered addictive when levels of dopamine cross or interrupt that normal threshold that they're mostly accustomed to, what we often refer to as homeostasis, that delicate balance in the brain. So when there's a disruption, eventually what happens the next day is that there's a total shock for the brain. So what the brain does is it basically impedes itself from releasing dopamine based on the massive overexertion of dopamine that occurred the night before. When someone has a genetic predisposition to addiction in comparison to someone that doesn't, their brains are capable of releasing 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 times more dopamine in comparison to someone that doesn't have a genetic predisposition to addiction, thus making the substance or the compulsory based behavior feel much more pleasant in the brain, which eventually leads to the severity of the craving. The severity of the craving is usually predicated upon how much dopamine is overexerted. From a personal experience, I can definitely tell you that I am someone that has a genetic predisposition to addiction. And I drank the first time when I was 15 years old. I drank tequila. And it didn't go well. I unfortunately drank so much tequila that I ended up puking. But here's what I do remember. When that small amount of alcohol that was remaining in my system hit my brain, it was by far the most memorable, pleasant, salient experience that I had ever experienced in my life. Consequently, the next day when I woke up, as soon as I woke up, I had that kind of urge of like, that felt great. I want to do it again. That uber excitement that I felt. And of course, what I didn't know is 3 generations of alcoholism was almost guaranteed to produce that response in comparison to my best friend who drank about the same that I did. And the next day he was like, it was fine. But it wasn't as much of this euphoria that I felt. Of course, that has a genetic background. The second thing, as it pertains to alcoholism, is that the folks that have a genetic predisposition to alcoholism have a higher tolerance to alcohol. Years and years of research has stated that eventually we adapt. And unfortunately, if we have a very strong genetic predisposition to addiction, epigenetic states that to increase our likelihood of staying alive, because it's predicated upon the fact that we're going to keep on drinking, we naturally have a higher tolerance. Now, why would that be a higher risk factor for addiction? Well, mostly because the more we need it, the more likely we are to get addicted, especially if we start consuming it at an earlier age. And the third factor has a lot to do with this very specific neuroreceptor in the brain that's called the D2 receptor. So what we now know is that alcohol and drugs, particularly when taken when you're a young person, erode D2 receptors. So D2 receptors are essentially the receptors that motivate people to forego instant gratification for a more delayed gratification down the road. So what that means is that the term addictive personality before people become addicted is actually a real thing. And if you have a genetic predisposition to addiction, due to a lack of D2 receptors, it's as if your brain favors instant-based gratification versus delayed gratifications. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you're bound to become addicted, but if you have that genetic predisposition to addiction, it is critical that first and foremost, you're aware that that does exist. And second of all, that you take action through life-altering choices based on relevant health-based information. Similar to someone that has a genetic predisposition to heart disease or a genetic predisposition to diabetes, it's in their best interest to get movement and to limit their amount of sugar and to eat a healthy diet and achieve a balanced weight. The same thing pertains to substance abuse and substance misuse. Genetic predisposition to addiction significantly increases the likelihood of someone becoming chemically dependent, but only if they begin to use, particularly at a younger age, which brings us to the second risk factor for addiction, which I've dedicated numerous slides after this one, and that is the age of first use. Why am I talking to you about young people? Because young people represent the segment of the population that's most vulnerable to substance abuse and substance misuse and addiction for one simple reason. Their brain is still developing. It is not yet 100% fully developed. That is conclusive. If there's anything that I want you to get out of this presentation is this: the more we delay the use of substances, the more we, especially during our teen years, we significantly decrease the likelihood of someone struggling with this horrific brain disease. And the third factor is the surrounding factor. This has a magnitude of culture, of societal norms, family environment. We know, for example, that the folks that have high trauma in their personal lives are much more likely to pick up substances. We also know that cultural social norms in a way dictate perception of risk and danger towards substances. So what happens, or what usually happens is, let's hypothetically assume we are in some place in the United States, and we know that alcohol and marijuana use is seen as theoretically not that bad, but cigarette use is seen as bad. What we find is that young people are most likely to flock to the drugs that they perceive to be the less harmful ones, or the substances that have been normalized. Normalization of substance use or behavior decreases perception of risk, especially if they're exposed to it via music. They're constantly exposed to it via social media, etc. All of those things decrease perception of risk because they normalize the behavior or the use of a substance. So this is essentially what we're battling. Oftentimes what we tell folks, especially parents, is that when they ask us, but there's this really bad drug that's called Flocka, or that's called carfentanil. Yeah, really, really bad. Based on likelihood of first-time use, they're much more addictive than other substances. But the likelihood of our kids using that substance is almost non-existent. The three most dangerous substances are usually the substances that young people perceive to be the least dangerous ones: alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. And oftentimes they are accompanied by permissiveness from parents, which further increases the susceptibility of them using that substance. So I wanted to briefly mention that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about addiction in the teen brain. So addiction is unfortunately a brain disease. The generalized definition of addiction is a repetitive and or compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite negative consequences. But when people become chemically dependent, there are two things that happen. The first one is a reversible process. The second one, unfortunately, is an irreversible process. So let's discuss what the reversible process is. That is mostly referred to as the desensitizing of pleasure reward systems in the brain. So what starts to happen is eventually the brain becomes accustomed to only releasing a very small amount of dopamine when the person uses the substance that he, she, they, or them are actually addicted to. That means that the brain is no longer able to release any sort of significant dopamine when people do the things that generally bring us joy. When we exercise, when we sleep, when we feel motivated to work, to get money, when we see our family, when we pick up our hobbies, when we listen to music, that no longer is pleasant to the brain. It doesn't excite it because it doesn't release dopamine. We have now become chemically dependent to only releasing dopamine when we use the substance that we are actually addicted to. So that's a devastating neurological process. That's why oftentimes addiction is so much misunderstood. It happened to me about 4 weeks ago, and it's happened to me significantly, many amount of times. I was on my way, I picked up some food at Arby's and I was driving back, and at the stop sign, this person came in and he asked me for money, and I said, I don't have money, but I'll do you better. I said, here's my lunch. I'll go buy me one. And he was genuinely offended. He's like, I didn't ask you for food, man. I asked you for money. And when I looked at his fingertips, they were charred, they were scarred. So what often happens is that's a sign that they've been flicking a lighter to smoke probably a drug called crack cocaine. And what dawned on me right there and then is that this person's brain prioritizes instinctively using the drug over food or shelter, kind of pillars, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of things that we need as a baseline, as a foundation. That's how devastating addiction is. Now, the good news is that that's reversible. The bad news is that it can sometimes take 1 or 2 years for that process to fully revert itself to where the brain is now able to release dopamine on its own accord, doing the things that generally bring us joy so that we feel motivated to do them again and again and again. The problem is, as any person that's gone through a rehabilitation facility or even through the process of sobriety will tell you, is that it is a living hell to go through the first or second year of their sobriety. I'll tell you personally, I've been sober for 18 years. If I relapse today, I don't think I could ever go back to being sober. And the reason why I say that is because I'll never forget how grueling, how devastating, and how dehumanizing my first and second year of sobriety felt. Because I was already operating under a severe neurological deficit. My brain was out of its normal balance. And we don't notice that until we lose it. And then regaining it is so, so incredibly difficult. This naturally speaks as to one of the main reasons why the people that unfortunately end up getting addicted, it's very, very difficult to bring them back. The recovery rates are sombering, very much so. So that's the reversible process. The irreversible process is mostly loss of control through the severance of critical neural pathways that we're supposed to develop primarily during our teen years, which is the main reason as to why, if we start drinking or using drugs at a young age, we really run the risk of messing up our brains permanently. This naturally explains the main reason as to why I can't drink or use any sort of mood-altering substance. I've been sober for 18 years, like I told you. And the process of sobriety has been up and down, but I'm fortunate that I've been sober. But what I will definitely tell you right here, right now, is that if I were to drink again or to use any sort of mood altering substance, I could probably control it the first time or even the second, third, or fourth, or fifth time. But unfortunately, due to the severance of critical neural pathways that mostly regulate self-control, directly related to the fact that I started drinking and using drugs at a really young age, eventually I would be unable to control myself. So I've made peace with that. Many folks don't. And there's literature dating back to the 1940s from Alcoholics Anonymous that, and I quote, The delusion that we are like other people has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women, they, them, that have lost their ability to control our drinking. We know that no real person and that no real alcoholic ever regains control. The persistence of us trying to gain control is astonishing. Many of us pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We had to fully recognize that we were powerless over this stuff, which is why this is the first step. This is way before they had these sophisticated brain scans that measure the depth of the damage that we inflict on ourselves when we become chemically dependent. My brain has changed, and it's changed permanently. This is the process that's so critical to get right. And unfortunately, and fortunately for the folks that delay, it only usually happens once during our lifetime, primarily during our adolescent years. So around 13 or 14, it's different for folks. Some started at 12, around puberty. The brain starts undergoing significant change. What change am I talking to? Am I talking about? Literally, the brain starts getting rid of half of the neurons that it was originally born with at birth. And these remaining neurons that are mostly like just concentrated in the mid part of the brain, which is by far the most primitive part of the brain, basically start to undergo this construction and myelination, which is just this protective coating. And they start forming larger neural pathways that basically create this interconnectivity throughout the brain. But the most important connections that basically distinguish adults from young people are the connections that have to properly develop between the mid part of the brain and the prefrontal cortex and our frontal lobe. This is our filter. So think about how much we use this basically unconsciously. We have a plethora of thoughts throughout any given day. Most of those thoughts we don't listen to. But think of a time as an adult when you've been really, really angry and you wanted to say something to someone, but then the other part of your brain, so you had that impulse to say something, but then this beautifully myelinated and insulated neural connection sent information very quickly to your prefrontal cortex, which filtered out the information and basically calmed you down, and you gave an eloquent response without really saying what you thought. That's the filtering that needs to happen. That's how sophisticated our brains are. What happens when people drink or use any sort of mood-altering substances, particularly when they're young, is that they damage these connections. So information is not properly sent, which basically means that impulse control is low, emotional regulation is low, and the brain is mostly pathologically wired to respond to instant versus delayed forms of gratification. So in a way, I still have and it's not a detriment to self, but I still have a significantly unmyelinated, unsophisticated brain because emotional regulation, self-control, impulse control is much harder for me in comparison to an adult or a regular adult who is not affected by the disease of addiction. This is why, and I'm repeating this, it is so critically important to try to delay the use of substances as much as we can. All right, now switching gears a little bit, because we have a lot of material to cover, and I was looking at the time and we have about 25 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about social norms. And I think that this is one of the main reasons as to why young people choose to use. When you talk to them about everything that I talk to you about, that their brains are a higher probability of getting addicted and all of these things might happen, emphasis on might, they see that so far-fetched, so far away. A teen or a preteen's brain is mostly centered on the here and the now, and it makes decisions according to the here and the now. One of the things that it favors, and that's part of normal neural development, is the ability to socialize and get along with their peers, kind of like leaving the nest, so to speak, and reaching out, making social connections and whatnot. Unfortunately, when it comes to substance use and substance misuse, what we find, according to our survey database, is that the majority of young people grossly overestimate alcohol, nicotine, and other drug use by their peers. And at the same time, they underestimate healthy behavior. So the problem lies in that if I believe that everyone else is doing something, I'm much more likely to do it, despite the fact that I know it might not be the best thing for me. But that best thing is kind of far-fetched. It's kind of out there. So I'm going to prioritize the here and the now because I need to be part of a group. It's always safer to be in the middle, which is why saying no to peer pressure becomes so incredibly difficult to do. So this is one thing that I find very, very important to mention to young people, is that oftentimes, and most oftentimes, their perception of behavior is inherently flawed. It's not true. Yet they make those decisions based on their perception of how high use is. Where do these false normative beliefs essentially come from? The media. What they see and hear, they think that it applies to everyone. So this is really, as a parent, we can make and stage interventions, but is it really everyone? And I've actually heard the opposite, that the majority of young people actually are making healthy choices when it comes to alcohol, nicotine, or other drug use. So it's very, very important. Just how wide is this gap between perception and reality? Take a look. So we ask students, United States abstinence from alcohol versus perception of abstinence from alcohol. So how high is alcohol use, for example, in the 6th grade? About 95% of students have never had a whole drink of alcohol. Yet 6th graders believe, their perception is that 20% have already started drinking by the time they're in 6th grade. That gap when they're in 7th grade widens to 29%, in the 8th grade to 45%, and in the 9th grade to 57%. So the 8th and 9th grade are critical years because these are usually the years where young people tend to follow the herd concept as they're starting to become much more individualized. So it's no coincidence that, according to our survey database, historically speaking, 8th and 9th graders are the grades that report the most pressure to drink or use mood altering substances. So we have to clarify those misconceptions and talk to students about, and young people about, where these misconceptions come from. Once we're able to do that, then we can help them understand that if their perception is wrong, they can make decisions based on what's actually happening versus what they perceive is actually happening. All right, so now we're going to switch gears again. So let's talk a little bit about 2021 latest student trends. So the first one is marijuana. So according to Monitoring the Future, use has remained steady. There's differences in teen use in states that have legalized marijuana, more teens shifting from plant matter to vaping or edibles. I want to emphasize this mostly due to the following. A regular marijuana joint during the 80s and 90s had about 1 to 3% THC content. Today, it has anywhere from 13 upwards to 99% pure THC content. THC is a psychoactive substance found inside marijuana. It's literally what gets you high. Part of the problem with marijuana particularly is that the potency of THC produces a much more drastic effect in comparison to how it was before. Because what's essentially happened is they've genetically modified the amount of THC and they've decreased the amount of CBD. That's why you get this separation of products where CBD and THC are two complete different entities, yet they mostly come from the marijuana plant. One of the problems with too much THC is that it could produce a psychotic induced episode, and it could actually produce the opposite of what marijuana is intended to do in some cases, which is basically, as we know, it inhibits our ability to vomit and feel nauseated. Well, when folks chronically smoke marijuana, they're much more likely to vomit and have this vomiting disease that's called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. That's basically what ER physicians have labeled the vomiting disease, that people are showing up into emergency rooms and they can't stop vomiting due to excessive marijuana consumption. The other thing is, for the folks that play sports, particularly young people that play sports, if they also smoke marijuana, they're much more likely to develop a psychotic induced episode, which is lose touch with reality. folks that seem to be at a higher risk of something having an adverse effect due to using marijuana are folks that have a genetic predisposition to mental health issues or disorders, or folks that have anxiety or depressive disorders. The likelihood of them developing a psychotic induced episode also significantly increases, as well as the amount of THC that's found in a vape. Now, most oftentimes when people smoke something, their brains are pretty good at measuring how high, signaling that's enough. The problem is when people eat edibles, because it could take about an hour to an hour and a half. Everyone's metabolism is different for that to reach the brain. So they could actually consume much more THC, and they could have a much more adverse, severe reaction to the marijuana. Many folks ask us, well, is marijuana addictive? The answer to that is yes. Is it more addictive than other substances? Well, based on prevalence of first-time use, no. Does that mean that it's less risky? Absolutely not. For the folks that have a history of mental health issues, it's much, much more riskier than other substances. And everyone's unique neurobiology is very different also. So there's no guarantee in the fact that if you smoke marijuana, you're going to have the same reaction. Marijuana is by far the only drug that fits into the category of 3. What do I mean when I say that? It can be classified as a central nervous system stimulant, a central nervous system depressant, or in rare occasions, a hallucinogen, which is why a lot of folks that say, I've smoked marijuana, that talk to us say, one time I saw someone smoking and they got really paranoid. The other one, they smoked it and they felt chill. That's basically the unpredictability that comes from marijuana use. And of course, that's increasing based on the potency of marijuana. So of course, the uses remain consistent and shift in how marijuana is consumed. And also, unfortunately, there are changes in perception of risk. A lot of young people, I shouldn't say a lot, I'd say some young people still perceive marijuana to be a relatively benign substance in comparison with other drugs. And this is just to quantify the data. This is what it looks like. So as you can see, it's remained relatively steady throughout the United States. So as more states talk about legalization, unfortunately, what we see is that perception of risk decreases and use, unfortunately, goes up. And now shifting gears to student trends, vaping and e-cigarettes. So one of the main findings is, of course, there's been exponential growth since 2017. But the good news is that that's finally, emphasis on finally, starting to level off. Part of it was the fear of vaping and the association with vaping and COVID-19, getting COVID-19 and getting a much more severe form of the disease. The most cited reason was fear of lungs weakening, followed by difficulty in access, and lastly, parents finding out. As we know that based on 2 major studies, the Chinese study and the Canadian study, parents spent much more time at home quarantining with, or basically in isolation with their kids. So higher parental supervision naturally decreases use across the spectrum. So that was definitely, favorable. The other thing about it too is that the FDA has finally been starting to catch up on being diligent in banning it and regulating it. And of course, they're fighting it in court left and right. But there's much more. I think that health-based campaigns and prevention-based campaigns have been much, much more intentional in conveying risks associated with electronic cigarettes. Just to name those risks, when electronic cigarettes say, we don't give you cancer, they're basically providing a half-truth. Yes, we can argue that there's no evidence-based research to support that yet. Will it show in the future that there is a link? I would mostly speculate in saying yes. But when I say it doesn't paint the whole picture, the interesting part about it is that what kills the majority of people that smoke traditional cigarettes, I'm not talking about e-cigarettes, I'm talking about traditional cigarettes, it's not cancer, it's actually heart disease. And the culprit of that is nicotine. Well, just so you know, electronic cigarettes have way more nicotine than a traditional cigarette. The nicotine that's found in electronic cigarettes is also uniquely distinctive in comparison to traditional nicotine. What do I mean by that? It's been mixed with benzoic acid to increase its alkalinity. What that means is that it's much more potent. To quantify that, a single inhalation of an electronic cigarette that has about 4 or 5% is essentially the equivalent of inhaling 3 or 4 puffs of a traditional cigarette. That's how much more nicotine it has. And as we know, nicotine taxes the cardiovascular system significantly. It ages it prematurely. It's a vasoconstrictor. So these are the dangers that are lurking there. And also, we do not yet know, unfortunately, the folks that smoke electronic cigarettes are the guinea pig generation for electronic cigarette for us to realize like what, if any, of adverse health consequences electronic cigarettes have. So frightening times in that sense. It's held steady. It's starting to go down. But it still remains really, really, really high amongst 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. You know, oftentimes, I've never seen this before. I work with schools all across the world, and consistently, especially with upperclassmen, 11th and 12th graders, a common question that I always get asked is, how do I quit nicotine addiction? And 7 or 8 years ago, for about 4 or 5 years before that, those were questions that seldom came up. So it's no coincidence that young people are getting addicted to this stuff at alarming rates. So this is what they look like. As you can see, especially the peach ice, that 5% is so incredibly misleading. 5% seems innocuous. It just seems like it's harmless. It doesn't do anything. It's 5%, right? 95% of it doesn't have, but those are the marketing campaigns that are so criminal and so much, they're terrible. I mean, because they aim at confusing people and at painting these electronic cigarettes as relatively benign substances that don't carry or convey any risks. Just want to play this out. Okay, so these are some of the pods that are currently on the market. I just wanted to, I don't think we're going to be able to cover the whole thing. Give me 1 second, because unfortunately it's stuck. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, so sorry about that. My computer always does that. So let's go back to this. Resume share. So how much is that? So this is the, so 4% multi-pack. I was telling you about that 5% strength. So they want you to, again, like I was saying, they want you to believe that it's harmless, that it doesn't have anything. But that's about 5% strength of what? 59.9 milligrams of nicotine. This is how much cigarettes is in those small pods that contain that e-juice. So this is basically a pack of cigarettes. So you can see in a Juul, it's about 20 to 40 cigarettes, depends on how much that is actually packed in that fix, which basically has it, the milliliter is a little higher. And then you have Soren. So as you can see, this is really no joke. The amount of nicotine that's found in these electronic cigarettes is disproportionately higher than what was originally found in traditional cigarettes. 20, 40, 75, and up to 90 cigarettes worth of nicotine. So whatever happened to that, relatively benign, it's all water vapor and stuff. Like, we've come a long way in educating people, but it's also important to be attentive if we spot or see anything suspicious that our kids might be carrying. And of course, this is what they look like. Again, relatively harmless, all made with very sleek marketing campaigns. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit because, again, I have about 5 minutes. I want to be diligent in pointing out that oftentimes these are some of the warning signs that you might be able to spot. If you observe any of these, it might just be that they're normal teenagers. But what I often tell parents is, if you suspect that something is amiss, especially if they're lying, if all of a sudden they're changing friend groups, their personality is not what it seems, when they're not out with their friends or whatnot, they kind of seem retracted or in a way isolated, it's always best to seek help. The problem with addiction, and what my parents did and some parents do, is that they assume that it will get better when people are on that path. Addiction is most treatable when it's caught early. Therefore, early intervention saves lives. So if there's anything that you suspect that might be amiss, something that you don't necessarily can't put your finger on, but your paternal or maternal instincts tell you that something is wrong, have that checked out. If you're able to do that, you significantly increase the likelihood of someone getting help, so it doesn't have to turn into a full-fledged addiction. So of course, this is what we talk about when we say that early intervention, when you know you can act. Always, when talking to people, especially young people, about a perceived threat to their health, it's important to contextualize that that is exactly what you're doing versus, I know you're doing this and this is bad and stuff. Talk to me about my health. If you suspect that something is going on, hey, so I've learned about substance use disorders, and the thing is, if young people start to drink or use at any young age, they significantly increase their likelihood of becoming chemically dependent. So I'm worried, I am concerned. Here's the expectation, and I want you to know this. I see this as a huge, huge health issue, and I'm going to do everything in my power to protect and help preserve your health, which is the most important finite thing that you have. So early intervention should always be that. Instead of pointing fingers and saying, no, this is bad, or this is good, or you shouldn't do this and that, always give context and always center that conversation on the health aspect of it. I think what makes us so incredibly effective at talking to young kids, to teenagers, is that we're not there to judge behavior. We're there to basically talk about this from a health-based perspective. That's why we're able to go literally across the globe. Our universal health passport, is health. This is centered on health. We know that what we're trying to do is empower young people to make healthy choices around this topic so that they avoid or mitigate their probability or susceptibility of becoming addicted. And lastly, the other thing about it is, most parents that I've talked to, when they tell me, but I've had conversations with my son or daughter, they, them, about addiction. And I'm like, how often? Well, I had one. How long did it last? About 20, 30 minutes. And was it you mostly speaking, or were they speaking? No, it was me mostly speaking. That's great. That's no problem. But prevention-based conversations should be consistent. There's always a place and a time to bring it up. When there's a major celebrity where something happened, often related to alcohol, nicotine, and other drugs. When you hear them talking with their friends, you can bring up a conversation. Prevention is continuing, it's ongoing. So it's not about having one 60-minute conversation, it's about having 61-minute conversations. Keeps it fresh in their brain as long as it's consistent. What else can you do? Of course, as an ongoing prevention conversation, the most important thing is, before they even start to go out, or right now, even if they're still going out, is know exactly what set your clear limits, boundaries, and expectations. Young people oftentimes, parents oftentimes have this assumption that, hey, if their friends have much more influence on them, that's not necessarily 100% true. whether you realize it or not, you are such an influential figure in their lives. So what you tell them matters. I have data to support what I'm saying. The University of Columbia basically did a survey with parents and young people. And one of the things that they found was parental permissiveness around alcohol basically dictated how much kids would drink. The more permissive they were, the more likely they were to binge drink. So your voice matters. And when you set these expectations, it's centered around health, right? We are trying to significantly delay the use as much as we can so that we significantly decrease the likelihood of them ever becoming addicted. And we're going to honor that commitment, and we're going to protect their brain till they're able to fully develop their brains, and they're able to, with that development, make informed choices so that they protect their brain. Always share your thoughts and concerns. Listen to their thoughts also about alcohol and other drugs. I've had many students tell me when my parents talk, they come over and they're like, you're there, like pointing, and they have a lot of fear. So sometimes I feel like, and what I'm like, what is your reaction? I just shut down and I just become an expert at doing this and going like, no. So, it's very important, the energy that we bring into these conversations as well. The more we familiarize ourselves with this topic, the less anxiety we have about going into a conversation. You don't need to be 100% experts, but you need to understand the pillars of why you're talking to them. And it's all about delaying their use to decrease their likelihood of becoming chemically dependent. Also teaching them resiliency, not taking away their consequences. That's a big one. I've always said this in all of my presentations mostly, is that I'm not just a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, I'm also a recovering big baby, mostly because my parents literally took away all the negative consequences. So I never learned accountability for my actions. I'm fortunate that when I got into rehab, even though was very, very difficult, I was able to fully learn that actions carry consequences. And I learned a key concept. I'm not talking about religious faith, but faith that if you do good things, you're most likely to be rewarded by your efforts of good things coming your way. So that was something that I started working towards. So I think that's all of that is important. What else can you do? Talk with your teens about alcohol and other drugs. 5% of students have had at least one conversation with their parents about alcohol or other drug use. 93% of students say their parents have clear rules about substance use. Very important. 95% of students say their parents show interest in their schoolwork. Also a huge protective factor. And of course, setting those clear limits and consequences and expectations. They are listening. And again, to our advantage as parents, they don't want to disappoint you. And again, what I said, research shows that youths who perceive that their parents disapprove of substance use and who report that their parents are involved in their day-to-day activities are less likely to use alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, or illicit drugs. So the power of parents, you're much more powerful than me in basically having that influence in your children's lives. And here are resources. And I went over for about 3 minutes, but stuck to 45. So with that, I am going to stop my share and we will take questions. It seems like we have plenty of questions. So that's, well, we have 2 questions. What are the—
And I'm gonna help you with the questions, but I want to make 2 comments really quickly.
Yep.
First of all, parents, thank you so much for being so engaged and appreciative of this program. It took me years directing the Parent Education Series to find an organization that I trusted around substance use. And when I found this organization, formerly FCD Prevention Works, I knew they were it, because everybody from the top down is a former addict, just as Eduardo mentioned. This is a real drill. And when they talk to students, they get it and it's real. So thank you, Eduardo. I learned stuff that I've never heard before. You explained everything so well. And yes, the video is going to be offered soon on our video library. Okay, here we go. Ready for a few questions?
Yes, absolutely. I will. They're just asking me in the chat to share the resources screen again. So let me just share my screen again, and then we will, okay. Yes, we'll get to that. Here we go.
Okay.
Yep.
And you know, this, again, I want to say FCD, now Prevention Solutions, also partners with our friends at Stanford, the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. So again, It's a nice cross-platform. We've actually been working with both these organizations for many years, so this is great. All right, Eduardo, here we go. Good question here. Where are the misperceptions about teen alcohol use and abstinence coming from?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. So a couple of things happen. One is anticipatory socialization. So historically, what starts to happen is many people have the assumption that false normative beliefs usually develop around 8th or 9th grade, but they don't. They usually develop around 5th or 6th grade. The reason is mostly when you're in 5th or 6th grade, you're starting to get introduced to the internet. You're starting to hear things. So anything that's salacious, that's very salient, that's negative, basically becomes in tune in the adolescent brain. So the problem is that you may know that it's bad for you, but you constantly bombarded with things that have happened. So you start to build a false narrative. A lot of that mostly comes from like movies that they watch or they're exposed to, what their friends are saying. Especially if they have an older sibling, they start to like get a very warped misconception of how high use is. Because they're still learning about that whole critical thinking and media literacy piece. Furthermore, social media, it's not that I'm shining negative light on social media. I think it's a great tool if used appropriately. But part of the problem is that oftentimes when there's something that happens, it's usually things that they see on social media that go viral. So therefore, with young people, we as adults, we can kind of figure that out. We are media literates. We have, it's ingrained in us to critically think about what information they're selling us, but young people are not able to yet make that distinction. So they grow up having formed a very false normative belief. Here's an example. Last week, I was working at a school, 2 weeks ago at a school in Qatar. And I asked the students, I'm like, this is something that I always do. I'm like, yeah, I work in Colombia. Oftentimes, and they're like, and I'm like, what? Pablo Escobar, cocaine, all the kids doing their cocaine. And I'm like, no. But it's great because like in a way, just because they've heard of Colombia, they instinctively think Pablo Escobar, thus everyone in Colombia uses cocaine, which is not actually true. So in a way, they have this implicit like stereotyping that basically applies to everything. Even if they see that in the 8th or 9th grade, you usually hear about, oh, this one kid got drunk, or even in the 6th or 7th grade, if Johnny got drunk one night, it hears, and they hear it all around across the community. And then basically they assume that everyone else is doing it. So we need to be able to talk to them about the fact that their perception is wrong, because it's not everyone. Just those simple health-based concepts of clarifying misconceptions are critical in helping them make informed choices. So great question.
Thank you, Eduardo. Really good point. Would you just comment for a minute on one of your core beliefs at Prevention Solutions, that prevention is a climate?
Yes, absolutely. So when we think about prevention as a climate, what I love about the organization that I work at is that we're not really there to just basically deliver a one talk and then be out. What we're trying to do is, in a way, what are the local resources that the community has that can be used as a protective factor? And what are the opportunities for growth that could be seen as a risk factor? So we enhance protective factors and we decrease risk factors by basically exposing what they are, and then working with communities to, in a way, substitute false perceptions, false normative beliefs with relevant health-based information. I've always had this thing where I remember this parent very vividly once telling me, I'm so sorry, I'm such a bad parent, because he fought me tooth and nail about, but I can teach them how to drink, I can do this. And when I gave him the information, the evidence-based research, he's like, and I'm like, you're not a bad parent. All it is that you are basically operating under cultural, social norms that have been transmitted to you generation from generation. And just because nothing happened to you nor your father, despite the fact that you started drinking at 15 or 16, what we're talking about here is a risk, is basically mitigating that risk, decreasing that susceptibility of becoming chemically dependent, thus creating a healthier climate for all audience, for all members of the community.
Really important. And that's what we're trying to do here tonight. This is a countywide event, San Mateo County, working with TUPE, Tobacco Use Prevention Education. So again, thank you all for being here. Don't miss the first 30 minutes. If you came late, do watch the video. All right, Eduardo, you mentioned that nicotine in e-cigarettes is of great concern, that the levels are high.
Mhm.
Here's a parent who asks a good question. Do you have any guidance for how to get our kids to quit if they are dependent?
Absolutely. I think that thank you so much for that question. I think that there are so many local resources, tobacco-free, I'm talking mostly referring to tobacco-free Florida, tobacco-free California, but also going to the pediatrician, to their pediatrician, and basically they will be able to provide kind of like a medical plan to try to get that child off of nicotine. But it's super, super important to do that, because the problem with nicotine addiction, we often have this negative light of marijuana. We think it's a gateway drug. It may be. I'm uncomfortable with the term gateway, but if there's a drug that shows that if you use it, you're much more likely to experiment with another substance within that same year, is nicotine. And also, it's one of the hardest drugs to get off of. So early intervention, if you suspect that something's amiss, take them to their physician, to their pediatrician. Bev, I'm sure that you all have resources outside of in the community that could be of guidance in helping young people essentially try to get themselves off of this substance with medical support. Because let me be clear on this. The likelihood of quitting nicotine once you're already addicted, cold turkey, is very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's best assisted if they're doing it with someone under medical supervision. So that's definitely my recommendation.
Okay, good advice. Thank you, Eduardo.
Yeah.
So here's a related question. You mentioned that the rates of recovery from addiction are dismal. What are they?
I just saw on the chat that someone said that they're also sober. I want to commend you for that. I think that oftentimes we don't celebrate the gift of having broken people fix broken people, and the gift of having come back from what is sure to be, for me at least, the most dehumanizing disease that's out there, because it robs you of who you are. I don't want to be negative, but their recovery rates range from anywhere from as low as 9% to about 27 to 36% of folks that when they go into a rehabilitation facility, they get off at least 2 years of sobriety.
So would you share those numbers with kids, Eduardo?
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. And of course, also it depends on how long they've been using. This is why early intervention is so critical. The average person that seeks help from a substance use or substance misuse usually has that addiction categorized as moderate or severe. Very seldom times is it moderate, severe, and
like mild,
moderate, and severe. Seldom is it mild, unfortunately. So because they're often the age range is between 30 or 40. 90% of people that get addicted during their teen years. So they have about 12 to 22 years where the addiction significantly progresses.
Wow, really important point. And I know FCD, now Prevention Solutions, advises that as parents, one of the things we can best do is delay having kids start using any substances. Eduardo, we've got a couple of minutes. What are your final words for parents? What do you want the most to take away tonight?
I don't want to be self-deprecating towards myself. It's not what I'm trying to do. But if there's anything that I want you to do, is think about the fact that introducing it leads to increases the likelihood of developing problems for the rest of their lives. Problems that I'm going to carry with me till the day I die. I'm 37. Like I said, I've been clean and sober since 18. I'm a norm breaker in the sense that I got sober when I was 19. I thank my parents for that because they sent me to a rehab, but I still live with the disease of addiction. It's still very much in me. I'm going to take a little bit of professional vulnerability here, but compulsive overeating has been my switch addiction. And it's been very, very difficult for me to break that pattern. My weight fluctuates significantly. So, and it's very demoralizing and very dehumanizing as well. Um, don't increase the likelihood of this, making life just at best case scenario much more difficult on the person that you love the most. And it's so simple, is just trying to delay as much as we can. I started at 15. Let me give you a positive light on this. Two siblings that had a genetic this is the silver lining, two siblings that also had a genetic predisposition to addiction, but yet made conscious decisions, because when we got to rehab, it was explained to us what the disease of addiction was. They didn't want to turn out like me. So what they did with a lot of intentionality and purpose was that they delayed. None of them have ever had struggled with substance use or substance misuse. So the difference between having had the right information or no information. So I'm not also going to say that, my life would have changed had someone talked to me. I don't know, but because I'd be speculating, but I probably would have thought about this. So you're informed. Go make the world a better place.
Thank you, Eduardo. And parents, again, if you have these kinds of addictive tendencies that run in your family, and very few families don't, do share that with your kids, because it does make a difference, just as Eduardo said. Thank you, everybody. And special thanks to Eduardo Torres for a really fantastic presentation tonight. We're hearing from people who work in professional agencies that handle addiction, and they're really grateful for the advice that you gave. So take care, everybody. Stay well, stay safe. We hope to see you again soon. We will be following up this event with other programs around vaping, tobacco, and addiction. So again, thank you for joining us. See you soon. Thank you,
Thank you,
Eduardo.
folks.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Good night.